Hey folks, this is Rhykker with a Diablo 3 patch 2.6.1 Season 12 Demon Hunter Guide. We still don't know when Season 12 will launch, but I've got great news for Demon Hunter players. Multishot is back in a big way. Not only will Multishot be possibly the best speedrunning build in the game, it's also going to be a very strong pushing build for Greater Rifts now. The Unhallowed Essence set has seen some damage buffs. The bow, the quiver, they've seen buffs. And now what was historically the Demon Hunter's best speedrunning set has now become possibly its best, if not one of its best, solo Greater Rift pushing sets. So let's take a refresher course in how to rock an Unhallowed Essence Multishot Demon Hunter. For this build, you will need the full 6 pieces of the Unhallowed Essence set. The 2-piece bonus makes our generators generate more hatred and discipline as well. The 4-piece bonus makes us deal more damage and take less damage as long as there are no enemies next to us. In this build, you'll want to stay as far away from enemies as possible. That said, the buff does last for 8 seconds, so if enemies do come close to you, you don't have to freak out too quickly. You could take time to finish killing them before backing away to safety. And for the 6-piece bonus, what we really care about here is that Multishot deals 100% more damage for every point of discipline you have. So this is both your max discipline, but also how much you currently have. So in this build, very important to conserve your discipline, and we'll go over ways to do that in a bit. Next mandatory piece of gear here will be the Yang's recurve. This bow makes your Multishot attack 50% faster and deal up to 200% more damage. And the final item that we absolutely need for this build is the Dead Man's Legacy, a quiver that makes Multishot hit enemies below 60% health twice, and increases damage by up to 200%. Those items form the core of this build. The rest of the items we'll go over just help out. For your belt, you'll want to go with a Witching Hour to maximize your damage. However, if you find you're running a little resource thirsty, you can instead go with a belt called the Hunter's Wrath. This makes your generators attack faster, and thus you'll recover resource faster. It also boosts generator damage, but generators are not a significant source of damage. For bracers, a staple of Demon Hunter builds, the Wraps of Clarity. These also see a buff in the coming patch. They give us more damage reduction now, and these will form an integral part of staying alive. When pushing Greater Rifts, you'll want to be popping a hatred generator at least once every 5 seconds to maintain this buff. Next, we're going to work in the Endless Walk set, the Traveler's Pledge, and Compass Rose Amulet and Ring combo. These give you more damage while you stand still and make you take less damage while moving. This is possibly one of the best, most ubiquitous item sets for pushing Greater Rifts. It grants us situational damage and situational toughness when we so desire. To round out our other rings, we have a Convention of Elements for just more damage, and an Elusive Ring for more toughness. For our purposes, the Elusive Ring makes us take 60% less damage every time we vault. For this reason, we'll want to vault at least once every 8 seconds. For our cubed weapon, a Dawn is very important. It is very difficult to run this build without a Dawn. A Dawn is used in just about every Demon Hunter build, and you want to try to achieve 100% uptime on the skill Vengeance. Dawn helps with that a lot, but we'll also need a little bit of cooldown reduction, which we'll cover when we get to the specifics of the gear. And then lastly here, we're taking a Cinder Coat. This reduces the resource cost of fire skills. Now, there's a couple different ways to build a Multishot Demon Hunter. You can go with a Focus and Restraint ring set instead of what we have here. Instead of a Cinder Coat, you can go with a Visage of Goons. That will be a source of 50% damage reduction. You could even technically go with a Stone of Jordan and a Convention of Elements, thanks to the buff to the 6-piece set that makes discipline even more important for the build. That still doesn't quite bring the importance of the Stone of Jordan on par with Focus and Restraint. So if you crunch the numbers, if you run the numbers, Focus and Restraint results in more damage than Convention of Elements and Stone of Jordan. Also, Endless Walk set and Convention of Elements results in overall more damage than a Stone of Jordan. Also, if you're considering swapping out your Convention of Elements for a Stone of Jordan while keeping the Endless Walk set, that still nets you overall less damage. While the Stone of Jordan damage is higher when you're off your fire rotation of Convention, if you average out the damage buff of Convention over time, including when you're off rotation, in other words, instead of a 200% bonus On fire rotation, let's say it's just a 50% bonus at all times, you on average are still dealing more damage with a convention rather than a Stone of Jordan. That said, if you prefer the consistency of the Stone of Jordan, if you don't like the convention of elements, or if you have a terrible convention of elements and a really good Stone of Jordan, then feel free to try out what works for you. If you feel you don't need the toughness because you're running easier content, you can go with Nemesis Bracers instead of Wraps of Clarity. You can use as a ring an Avarice Band, get a Gold Wrap as your belt, use the Boon of the Hoarder Gem. This is if you're running regular rifts. Gold is going to drop, you're going to increase your armor, that's going to be your source of sustain. If you want to be pure glass cannon, you can go with Focus and Restraint. Lose the Elusive Ring entirely, go with the Convention of Elements there. So you definitely have options as to how you build your Unhallowed Essence Demon Hunter. If you're not taking the Traveler's Pledge, then you'll want to go with the Hellfire Amulet, squeeze in a 5th passive. The Demon Hunter has some really good passives, but the version we're presenting right here, this is what is optimal for Greater Rift pushing, and a big reason is that we have a good amount of toughness buffs. Traveler's Pledge and Compass Rose, again, they give us a good chunk of damage resistance when we need it. It's going to be a lot tougher to push in Greater Rifts with Focus and Restraint. A quick look at our gems, we're going to want Zay's Stone of Vengeance. You deal more damage to enemies far away from you, and you want to be as far away from enemies as possible. With this build, keep them on the periphery of your vision. You screen clear with Multishot. We'll want a Bane of the Trapped. Don't worry, we'll have a way to crowd control enemies to benefit from that buff. And then for your last gem, if you're pushing high Greater Rifts, you'll want a Bane of the Stricken, but for speedruns, a Bane of the Powerful will serve you better. Now the Cinder Coat here, this is going to help with our resource management, not just of our Multishot, which will be fire-based, but also of our Vaulting, which uses up Discipline. And that takes us to our skills. So for Vault, if and only if you have a Cinder Coat in the cube, you'll want to take Trail of Cinders. The combination of Cinder Coat plus Vault Trail of Cinders makes Vault cost less discipline than any other option. If you're not going with that, then you'll want to take Tumble, that's the second best option. Tumble averages out to a 25% less consumption of discipline, whereas with the Cinder Coat, it's 30%. Our bread and butter attack will be Multishot Arsenal. This is the most damaging rune for the skill. Next, we'll want to take Preparation Invigoration. The reason being that this permanently increases our max discipline by 20. Having this skill is a flat damage buff. And if you find that you're consuming your discipline as you're going down, be sure to pop your preparation, because as your discipline drops, so does your damage. You want to try to stay as close as possible to 100% discipline at all times. That said, don't pop preparation if it'll take you over your max, because then it's a waste of preparation. Wait for your discipline to go a little bit lower first. Next, we're taking Evasive Fire Focus, because it's the generator that gives us back the greatest amount of hatred. Next, Vengeance Seethe. We want to maintain permanent vengeance. Vengeance gives us a straight huge damage buff, and the Seethe rune makes us regenerate a lot more hatred per second, which really helps with resource management. Then lastly, we're going with Companion. Boar Companion, it is just a straight toughness buff. That said, if you want to go for pure damage, you can always go with the Wolf Companion instead. On to our passives, we're going with Ballistics, which boosts rocket damage, and the rune we took on Multishot, a big chunk of its damage comes from rockets, so this is a big damage buff. We're going with Ambush. You deal 40% additional damage to enemies above 75% health. And remember what our offhand does, our quiver? It makes us effectively deal double damage to enemies under 60% health, so this combines really well with that. Next, we're going with Thrill of the Hunt. Enemies hit by your hatred spenders are slowed. This is what applies the effect that will trigger our Bane of the Trapped. We're going to be spraying Multishot all over the place. All enemies will be crowd controlled. And lastly, to combine with that, Call the Weak, 20% more damage to these enemies. If you have a Hellfire Amulet, then as a 5th passive, you can either go with Awareness to gain a free life, or if you want to go full on glass cannon, take steady aim for more damage. Steady aim combines really well with the Unhallowed set because it forces you to stay away from enemies. Alright, back to the gear and what you want on every piece of gear. Do note that my gear is not optimized. Despite this, I cakewalked through this Greater Rift 90. I have 0 augments. I don't even have full ancient items. Multishot is just doing really well, and people keep asking me, what am I going to go in Season 12? Right now, I'm thinking Multishot Demon Hunter. I'll have a link in the description below to the D3 planner. I'll try to keep that link up to date with all the best gear you want for this build with the most optimized stats. So, for your shoulders, you ideally want Dex, Vitality, Cooldown, All Resist. For your helm, Dexterity, Crit Chance, Multishot damage. You can go with Vitality instead, but you really want to squeeze out a little bit more multi-shot damage. For your Traveler's Pledge, Fire, Crit Chance, Crit Damage. For your chest, Dex, Vitality, Life. Try to get a secondary resistance wherever you can, but very important here, secondary, plus 12 max discipline. That's the most important stat on the chest piece. Even if you have an ancient chest piece, if it does not have that secondary, trash it. Take anything that has a secondary plus 12 max discipline. Remember, that's our damage source. For the gems you put in your chest and in your pants, emeralds for damage, diamonds for toughness. It's up to you what you want to go with. For your gloves, ideally dexterity, attack speed, crit chance, crit damage. You'll notice that I have cooldown here, so let's have that cooldown discussion right now. If you have just 2 pieces of gear with full cooldown, in my case, gloves at 8, and shoulders at 8. If you have that combined with your Paragon cooldown maxed out and a top level diamond in your helm, then you will have roughly 33.3 repeating percent cooldown reduction, which is enough to have about 95% uptime on Vengeance. I found that to be acceptable. Having just a moment of downtime outside of Vengeance isn't that big a deal, particularly if you're not running with a visage of goons and your toughness isn't super dependent, your damage reduction isn't super dependent on being in Vengeance. If, however, you want full permanent Vengeance with 0 downtime, then you need 1 additional source of cooldown reduction. For your Convention of Elements, you'll want crit cooldown. Where you get the cooldown reduction isn't terribly important. You definitely need cooldown on the shoulders. Why? Because on your gloves or on your rings, you're giving up a damage stat for cooldown. On your shoulders, you don't have to give up a damage stat. And then for your compass rose, you want dexterity, crit chance, crit damage, raw damage. For our pants, Dex, Vitality, All Resist. For our boots, Dex, Vitality, All Resist, Multi-Shot damage. For our Yangs, Recurve, percent damage, dexterity, life per hit, resource cost reduction, and as a secondary, very important, plus 12 max discipline. We are spraying multi-shots so fast, having that life per hit will be really strong, a really good source of healing. And then lastly, for your Dead Man's Legacy, Dex, Vitality, attack speed, crit chance, multi-shot damage, max discipline. You could give up the Vitality for another damage stat. You can even get your cooldown reduction here if you want, but that does take away a little bit of toughness. The choice is up to you. For our Paragon points, you'll want to get your total move speed up to 25%, then dump everything into dexterity, although you could increase your hatred a bit, up to personal preference if you feel you need the extra hatred. For offense, cooldown reduction, crit damage, crit chance, attack speed. For defense, all resist, life, armor, life regen. And for utility, resource cost reduction, life on hit, area damage. And that wraps up this guide. Remember to follow the link in the D3 planner when season goes live to see if any changes have been made to this build. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my Twitch and Patreon supporters for making these videos possible. If you enjoyed this video, please share it. Check out these other videos and subscribe to join Rhykker's Raiders for more Diablo guides.